The rain came down like Judgment Day itself, turning the dusty streets of Willow Creek into rivers of mud. Steam rose from the locomotive as it groaned to a stop, black smoke mixing with the gray Wyoming sky. Lena Morrell stood on the platform, her white wedding dress already darkening with moisture, the delicate lace trim sagging under the weight of water. She clutched her valise in one hand and the marriage certificate in the other, though the paper was already softening in the rain. Her eyes searched the gathering crowd for a face she'd only seen in a tintype photograph. Clyde Morrison, the blacksmith who'd sent for her through the matrimonial agency back in Philadelphia. The crowd parted, and there he stood. But instead of welcome, his face twisted with disgust the moment his eyes landed on her. He was older than his photograph suggested, grayer, with deep lines carved by sun and disappointment. His gaze traveled from her mud-splattered hem to her rain-soaked hair, and he shook his head slowly, deliberately. "You ain't what was advertised." Clyde spat, loud enough for the gathering townsfolk to hear. "Look at you, already ruined before you even stepped foot in town." "In Mr. Morrison?" Lena's voice came out smaller than she intended. "I'm Lena Morrell. We corresponded." "I know who you claim to be." He turned to the crowd, gesturing wildly. "But this ain't the woman in the picture she sent. This here's damaged goods, trying to pass herself off as a proper bride." The townspeople pressed closer, their whispers rising like the hiss of serpents. Lena caught fragments. "Mail order. Desperate." "What kind of woman?" "Please," Lena said, raising her chin despite the trembling in her limbs. "If we could speak privately." "Nothing private about it," Clyde declared. "I paid good money for a wife, not some bedraggled creature who can't even keep herself presentable for her own wedding day. Deal's off. Find yourself somewhere else to peddle your wares." He turned and stalked away, leaving Lena standing alone as the rain intensified. The crowd didn't disperse. They circled like vultures, their judgment as palpable as the water soaking through her dress to her skin. A woman in a severe black bonnet shook her head. "Shameful, coming all this way to trap a man." "Probably lied about everything," another added. "They always do, these catalog brides." Lena's fingers went numb around her valise handle. She'd spent her last dollar on the train ticket, believing in the promise of a new life. The marriage certificate in her hand was nothing but wet pulp now, the ink running like tears. She stumbled away from the station, her boots squelching in the mud. The main street stretched before her, a gauntlet of storefronts and staring faces. She knocked at the hotel first, water streaming from her hair into her eyes. The proprietor, a thin man with pomaded hair, looked her up and down. "We don't take in strays," he said, and shut the door in her face. "At the church, she found the doors locked. She pounded until her fists ached, but no one answered. The parsonage beside it showed lamplight through the windows, but when she knocked, the curtains twitched closed." The boarding house matron was more direct. "I run a respectable establishment. No room for abandoned brides who might bring scandal to my door." Each rejection cut deeper than the last. The rain had turned cold now, seeping through every layer of cloth. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably, and her legs shook with each step. The beautiful dress she'd sewn by candlelight for months, dreaming of this day, now clung to her like a shroud. She found herself at the edge of town, where the buildings grew sparse and the prairie began. An abandoned saloon stood dark and empty, its windows boarded, its porch sagging but still offering some shelter from the storm. Lena collapsed against the wall, sliding down until she sat in a puddle of her own making. Hunger gnawed at her stomach. She hadn't eaten since yesterday, saving her last coins for food she'd thought she'd share at her wedding feast. The cold went beyond her skin now, settling into her bones. She closed her eyes, wondering if this was how she'd die, not in the marriage bed she'd imagined, but alone in the mud, wearing a dress meant for joy. The sound of hooves made her open her eyes. Through the rain, she saw a rider approaching, leading a pack horse loaded with supplies. He sat his mount like he was born to it, broad shoulders squared against the storm. As he drew closer, she could make out weathered leather chaps, a worn duster, and a hat pulled low against the rain. He reined in his horse, studying her from beneath the hat brim. Even in the dim light, she could see the planes of his face were hard, marked by sun and wind. A scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw, pale against his tanned skin. "Are you planning on dying there?" His voice was gravel and smoke, neither kind nor cruel. Lena tried to answer, but her teeth chattered too violently. She managed only to shake her head. The rider dismounted in one fluid motion, ground-tying his horse. He pulled off his leather duster and threw it around her shoulders without ceremony. The coat was still warm from his body heat and smelled of leather, tobacco, and sage. "Can you stand?" She tried, but her legs buckled. Without asking permission, he lifted her as if she weighed nothing, carrying her to his horse. I can't," she stammered. "You can die here or take your chances with me," he said bluntly. "Choose quick. Storm's getting worse." Through chattering teeth, she managed, "Who are you?" "Calder Harlan. Got a place few miles out." He set her on his horse, swinging up behind her. His arm came around her waist to hold her steady, and she had no choice but to lean back against his chest. "You got a name? Or should I just call you Mud Hen?" Despite everything, a laugh bubbled up, maybe hysteria, maybe the absurdity of it all. "Lena Morell?" "Well, Lena Morell," he said, turning his horse toward the open prairie. "Let's see if we can keep you breathing until morning." The pack horse followed as they rode into the storm. Behind them, the lights of Willow Creek grew dim, then disappeared entirely. Lena's last coherent thought before the cold and exhaustion took her was that she'd traded one unknown fate for another. But at least this one came with warmth at her back and strong arms keeping her from falling. The rain continued, washing away her footprints from the town that had rejected her, as if she'd never been there at all. Only the ruined wedding dress remained as evidence of dreams dissolved in Wyoming mud, and even that was now hidden beneath a stranger's coat, carried into the darkness by a man who asked no questions and made no promises. Lena woke to unfamiliar sounds, crackling wood in a fireplace, wind whistling through gaps in timber walls, and the steady breathing of someone nearby. Her eyes opened slowly, taking in rough-hewn beams overhead and a buffalo hide covering her body. The wedding dress was gone. She wore an oversized flannel shirt and wool trousers rolled at the cuffs. Panic seized her chest. She sat up too quickly, and the room spun. "Easy." The gravelly voice came from near the fireplace. Calder Harlan sat in a ladder-back chair, cleaning a rifle with methodical movements. "You've been out 2 days? Fever broke this morning." 2 days. Lena's hand went to her throat, finding it bare. Even her mother's locket was gone. "Your things are drying by the stove," he said without looking up. What was salvageable? Anyway, that dress was done for. She pulled the buffalo hide higher. "You undressed me? Would have been a fool thing to let you die of pneumonia for modesty's sake." His tone held no defensiveness, just fact. "There's stew on the stove. You need to eat." The cabin was sparse but clean, one room with a bed in the corner, a table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with preserves and ammunition. Everything had its place, arranged with military precision. No softness anywhere, no hint of a woman's touch. Lena's stomach cramped with hunger, overriding her discomfort. She stood carefully, the 2 long trousers pooling at her feet. The smell of rabbit stew made her mouth water. "Spoons in the drawer," Calder said, still focused on his rifle. She ladled stew into a tin bowl, her hands shaking slightly. The first spoonful burned her tongue, but she didn't care. It was seasoned with wild onion and sage. Simple but good. She ate standing by the stove, aware of his presence, but grateful he didn't watch her directly. "Thank you," she said when the bowl was empty. He finally looked up, his dark eyes unreadable. "Don't thank me yet. Soon as you're steady." You'll need to figure your next move. This ain't a boarding house." "I know." She straightened her shoulders. "I can work, cook, clean, tend animals. I'll earn my keep until I can move on. I don't need a housekeeper. Then I'll split wood, mend fences, whatever needs doing." Desperation crept into her voice despite her efforts. "I'm not asking for charity, just time to figure things out." He set the rifle aside and stood, moving to the window. Outside, snow had begun falling, late for the season but not unusual in Wyoming. "You any good with horses?" "I learned some. Back home, my uncle kept draft horses." "These ain't plow horses. They're half-wild Mustangs, and they don't trust easy." He turned back to her. "But my mare's due to foal soon, and I could use an extra pair of hands. You can stay until she delivers. After that, we'll see." It was more than she'd dared hope for. "I accept." He nodded once, then grabbed his coat from a peg. "I'll be in the barn. There's water in the pitcher for washing. And find something in that trunk that fits better." He gestured to a leather trunk by the bed. "Those belong to someone who don't need them anymore." The door closed behind him, leaving Lena alone. She moved to the trunk, lifting the lid carefully. Women's clothes lay folded inside, practical dresses, undergarments, a wool shawl. They smelled of cedar and old lavender. Whose were they? A wife? Sister? The question burned, but she wouldn't ask. She'd learned already that Calder Harlan valued privacy above courtesy. She washed with the cold water, scrubbing away the last traces of fever sweat. The clothes fit reasonably well, a brown wool dress that had seen better days but was clean and sturdy. In the small mirror above the washstand, she hardly recognized herself. The desperate bride was gone, replaced by someone harder, warier. The rest of the day passed in careful negotiation of space. Lena cleaned the already clean cabin, made biscuits with the supplies she found, tended the fire. When Calder returned at dusk, covered in hay dust and smelling of horses, he surveyed her work without comment. They ate in silence. The biscuits, more stew, canned peaches for dessert. He answered her practical questions about the ranch with short replies. 500 acres, 23 horses, no cattle, too much trouble, no hired hands, couldn't abide strangers. "Where did you learn to cook?" he asked suddenly, the first personal question he'd posed. "My mother. She took in washing, but she'd worked in a rich family's kitchen when she was young. She taught me everything." Lena paused, then added, "She died last year. That's when I answered the advertisement." He absorbed this information with a nod. "The mare's called Sage. She's particular about who she lets near. We'll see tomorrow if she tolerates you." It was a dismissal. Lena cleared the dishes, washed them in the basin, aware of him watching her now. When she finished, she turned to find him holding out a heavy blanket. "You'll sleep by the fire tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out better arrangements." She took the blanket, their fingers brushing briefly. His hands were calloused, marked with old scars. "Mr. Harlan. Just Calder. We don't stand on ceremony here." "Calder." The name felt strange on her tongue. "Why did you help me? Really?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Finally," he said. "Saw someone once, left in the rain like that. Didn't help them. They died." He moved toward the door, checking the locks. "Won't make that mistake twice?" That night, Lena lay on the floor by the fire, listening to the wind and the occasional creak of the bed where Calder slept. She thought about the clothes in the trunk, about someone left in the rain, about the way he'd said, "someone who don't need them anymore." The cabin held ghosts. She could feel them in the corners, in the careful way everything was maintained but not lived in. She'd traded one mystery for another, one uncertain future for a temporary reprieve. But she was warm, fed, and alive. For now, that was enough. In the morning, she woke to find Calder already gone. Coffee warm on the stove and a note on the table. "Barn, come when you're ready." She dressed quickly, wrapped the shawl around her shoulders, and stepped into the crisp morning air. The storm had passed. leaving a thin layer of snow that would melt by noon. The barn stood 100 yards from the cabin, solid and well-maintained like everything else on this strange, isolated ranch. Inside, she found Calder in a stall with a beautiful bay mare whose sides were swollen with pregnancy. The horse's ears went back when Lena appeared, nostrils flaring. "Easy, girl," Calder murmured, his voice gentler than she'd heard it. "Just someone new. No harm meant." Lena stayed very still by the stall door. The mare studied her with the liquid brown eyes, taking her measure. After a long moment, the ears came forward slightly. "Hold out your hand," Calder instructed. "Let her get your scent." Lena extended her hand slowly. The mare stretched her neck, nostrils working, then suddenly sneezed, spraying Lena with horse snot. To her surprise, Calder chuckled, a rusty sound, like he'd forgotten how. "She likes you. That's her way of saying hello." "Charming," Lena said, wiping her face with her sleeve, but she was smiling too. It was the first moment of simple, shared humanity between them, the beginning of something that wasn't quite friendship but was no longer mere survival. In that barn, with the morning light slanting through the gaps in the boards and the pregnant mare between them, Lena felt the first fragile hope that she might find a place here, however temporary. "Come on," Calder said, opening the stall door. "Let's teach you about horses." The riders came on a Sunday morning, their horses' hooves breaking the frost-covered ground. Lena saw them first through the kitchen window, 6 men, led by Reverend Josiah Pritchard, his black coat flapping like crow's wings. She recognized others from town: Samuel Hayes, the banker, Thomas Garrett, who ran the general store, and 3 ranch hands she'd seen sneering at the station. "Calder," she called, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. "Company." He appeared from the bedroom, already dressed, as if he'd been expecting this. His gun belt was buckled, the Colt sitting easy on his hip. "Stay inside," he ordered, but Lena followed him onto the porch anyway. The men reined up just beyond the yard, keeping that careful distance that said they weren't exactly friendly but weren't looking for a gunfight. Yet. "Harlan," the Reverend said, his thin face pinched with disapproval. "We need to discuss your situation." "Nothing to discuss," Calder replied, thumbs hooked in his belt, relaxed but ready. "This is my land. You're trespassing. The moral fabric of our community is everyone's concern," Pritchard continued, his gaze sliding to Lena like she was something scraped off his boot. "You're harboring a woman of questionable virtue, unmarried, living under your roof. It's indecent. She works for me, tends the horses. Nothing indecent about honest work." Samuel Hayes leaned forward in his saddle. "Come now, Harlan. We all know what kind of woman travels alone, arrives in a wedding dress, then takes up with the first man who'll have her." The words hit Lena like a slap, but before she could respond, Calder stepped forward. The movement was subtle, but every man there recognized the shift from defensive to dangerous. "Careful, Hayes," Calder said softly. "Your own wife came here as a mail-order bride. If memory serves, you saying something about her virtue?" Hayes' face reddened. "That's different. We were properly married, in a dress she bought with money you sent." Calder continued. "Only difference is, your bride found a man who'd claim her. Miss Morrell found a coward who broke his word." "Now see here," Garrett started, but Calder cut him off. "No, you see, the lady's employment here is my business. She's under my protection, and any man who thinks different can take it up with me directly." His hand didn't move to his gun. Didn't need to. The promise was clear in his stance. "Any of you feeling that brave today?" The ranch hands shifted nervously. They'd heard stories about Calder Harlan, about why he lived alone, about what happened to men who pushed him too far. Reverend Pritchard raised a placating hand. "No one wants violence, Mr. Harlan. We're simply concerned about propriety. Perhaps if Miss Morrell were to stay with a proper family in town." "Which family?" Lena stepped forward, surprising them all. "Which one of your proper families would take in a woman with no money, no connections, no standing? Which of your good Christian wives would risk their reputation to help someone like me? Silence answered her. That's what I thought. She continued, anger giving her strength. You're not here about morality. You're here because the idea of a woman choosing her own way offends you. Because I didn't crawl away to die when your town rejected me. Shameless, one of the ranch hands muttered. Yes, Lena agreed, meeting his eyes directly. I am without shame for surviving, for working, for refusing to beg for your approval or your charity. Calder glanced at her, something like approval flickering in his dark eyes before he turned back to the men. The lady's made her position clear. So have I. Now get off my land. Pritchard's face had gone pale with fury. This isn't over. Harlan, the town won't stand for... The town can go to hell. Calder's voice was flat, final. And you can lead the way, Reverend. For a moment, the morning balanced on a knife's edge. Then Hayes turned his horse, the others following. Pritchard lingered, his righteous anger warring with self-preservation. You'll regret this, he said finally. Both of you, God's judgment. Save your sermons for someone who gives a damn. Calder said, You've got 10 seconds to clear my property line. They left in a cloud of dust and muttered threats. Lena stood beside Calder until they disappeared over the rise, then found her legs shaking. She gripped the porch rail to steady herself. You shouldn't have spoken up, Calder said, though his tone held no real censure. Men like that don't forget when a woman talks back. They already thought the worst of me. What did I have to lose? He studied her for a long moment. Come on, I need to check the fence line. Might as well teach you to shoot while we're out. You think they'll come back? Maybe, maybe not, but if they do, better you know which end of a gun to point at them. An hour later, Lena stood in a meadow, holding Calder's spare revolver. It was heavier than she'd expected, the metal cold despite the warming day. He stood behind her, adjusting her stance. Feet wider, that's it. Now, don't jerk the trigger, squeeze it gentle, like you're trying not to wake someone. She fired. The recoil knocked her back a step, and the shot went wild, striking nothing but air. Again, he said patiently. They spent the afternoon like that, shot after shot, until her ears rang and her arm ached. But by the end, she could hit the makeshift target, an old feed sack stuffed with hay, more often than not. As they walked back, leading the horses, Calder said, You did good today. Not just the shooting, standing up to them. My mother used to say I had too much spine for my own good. Your mother was wrong. In this country, a woman needs all the spine she can grow. He paused at the barn door. That offer to leave when the mare foals, forget it. You can stay as long as you need. Those bastards made it personal now. That evening, as Lena prepared supper, she found herself humming, something she hadn't done since leaving Philadelphia. The cabin felt different somehow, less like a tomb and more like a fortress. When Calder came in from evening chores, she had venison steak and potatoes ready, coffee hot on the stove. They ate companionably, the silence between them no longer strained. As she cleared the dishes, Calder spoke suddenly. Her name was Margaret, my wife. Those clothes you're wearing. Lena's hand stilled on the plates. What happened to her? Fever. 3 winters ago. Doctor was 2 days' ride away. By the time he got here, he shrugged, the gesture containing volumes of old pain. Buried her up on the ridge, where she liked to watch the sunrise. I'm sorry. She would have liked you. Spoke her mind, too. Never could understand why that was considered a fault in a woman. He stood abruptly. I'll be checking on Sage. After he left, Lena finished the dishes slowly, thinking about Margaret who watched sunrises, about clothes that fit her well enough, about a man who'd kept his wife's things for 3 years. The cabin's ghosts felt friendlier now, less like warnings and more like welcomes. Later, sitting by the fire mending one of Calder's shirts, she heard him come back in. He moved to his chair, picking up a book, one of several on the shelf she hadn't expected a rancher to own. What are you reading? She asked. Plutarch, ancient Greek and Roman biographies. Helps pass the evenings. He glanced at her, You read? Yes. My mother insisted. Said education was the only thing no one could take from you. Smart woman. He gestured to the shelf. Help yourself, if you like. Margaret collected them, said a house without books was just a fancy barn. It was the most he'd spoken about anything personal. Lena chose carefully. A worn copy of Jane Eyre, its pages soft with handling. They sat in companionable silence, reading by lamplight while the fire crackled and the wind sang around the eaves. When she finally stood to retire, still to her makeshift bed by the fire, though neither mentioned the impropriety anymore, Calder spoke without looking up from his book. You asked what I think you are, that first night. Lena paused, waiting. I think you're someone who refuses to break. That's rare. He turned a page, as if the observation was casual. Valuable, in this country. She carried those words with her into sleep, wrapped in them like an extra blanket against the cold. Outside, wolves howled in the distant hills, but inside the cabin was warm and safe. For the first time since stepping off the train in Willow Creek, Lena felt something that might have been the beginning of belonging. Tomorrow there would be chores, and Sage to tend, and perhaps more lessons with the gun. Tomorrow the town might scheme and gossip and judge, but tonight she was simply a woman with a roof over her head, honest work for her hands, and a man who saw strength where others saw only scandal. It was, she thought as sleep claimed her, more than enough to build on. The morning after the town's visit brought new rhythms. Lena woke to find fresh eggs beside the stove and coffee already made. Calder's way of acknowledging something had shifted between them. She scrambled the eggs with wild onions she'd found by the creek, and when he came in from the morning chores, he actually smiled at the smell. Sage's baby dropped lower overnight, he said, washing his hands in the basin. Won't be long now. It became their pattern over the following weeks. Shared meals, small observations, the gradual building of trust. The mare grew rounder, more restless. Lena spent hours with her, brushing her coat, talking nonsense that seemed to soothe them both. One afternoon, the newborn calf from the neighboring ranch somehow wandered onto Calder's property, bawling for its mother. They spent 3 ridiculous hours trying to herd it back, slipping in mud, cursing and laughing by turns. When they finally got the calf through the fence, they were both covered in muck. You look like you've been wrestling pigs, Lena said, trying to wipe mud from her face and only making it worse. You should see yourself. Calder retorted, like a mud doll come to life. They stood there grinning at each other like fools, and something warm sparked in the air between them. The moment stretched, became aware of itself, and they both looked away. That night, Lena made bread pudding with the last of the stale biscuits, adding cinnamon she'd found in the back of a cupboard. Calder ate 2 helpings, then said quietly, Margaret used to make this. I can stop. No. He looked up at her. It's good to have sweet things in the house again. The letter came 2 days later. Calder had ridden to town for supplies, returning with a grim expression and a wanted poster folded in his saddlebag. He didn't show it to her immediately. Instead, he unloaded the supplies in silence, his movements careful and controlled. Finally, at supper, he placed the paper between them. Lena's own face stared back at her, a sketch that captured enough of her features to be recognizable. Wanted for murder in the Idaho Territory, Lena Morrell. Reward $500. Her hands trembled as she read the details. Wanted for the killing of her husband, Jonathan Morrell, armed and dangerous. Husband, Calder said, his voice neutral. Not fiancé. Yes. The word came out barely above a whisper. And you killed him? Yes. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. Tell me. So she did. The words came haltingly at first, then in a rush. The marriage at 16 to a man 3 times her age. The bruises hidden beneath long sleeves. The nights of terror. The final evening when he'd come at her with a fireplace poker, drunk and raging. The moment she'd grabbed the kitchen knife. I didn't mean to kill him, she finished. I just wanted him to stop. But the blade went deep, and he He bled so much. I tried to explain to the sheriff, but Jonathan's brother is the mayor. They said I was a murderess, that I'd planned it. I ran, changed my name from Garrison to Morrell, thought using his name might throw them off. Answered that advertisement for a mail-order bride, thinking I could disappear out here. The silence stretched between them. Calder hadn't moved, hadn't shown any expression during her confession. Now he stood, walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "He deserve it?" he asked finally. "Yes." No hesitation this time. "He was killing me slowly. I just finished it quick." He turned then, and she expected to see disgust, fear, anger. Instead, his dark eyes held something like understanding. "Then I believe you." The relief nearly broke her. She pressed her hands flat on the table to keep them from shaking. "That's it? No more questions? What else is there? You defended yourself against a man who would have killed you. The law might not see it that way, but the law's been wrong before." He moved back to the table, folded the poster, and tossed it into the fire. "Far as I'm concerned, Lena Garrison died in Idaho. You're Lena Morrell, and you work for me." Tears burned her eyes. "Calder, if they come looking, let them come." His voice held that dangerous edge she'd heard when he faced down the townsmen. "Won't be the first time I've stood between the law and what's right." She wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his face warned her off. Instead, she whispered, "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This changes things. You'll need to stay out of town completely now. And we should work on changing your appearance some." Over the next days, they did just that. Calder cut her hair shorter, showing her how to pin it differently. She started wearing Margaret's plainer dresses, a pair of men's trousers for barn work, with dirt under her nails and her skin tanned from working outside. She looked less like the desperate bride who'd stepped off the train, but the knowledge hung between them. She was hunted. Every rider on the horizon made them tense. Calder took to wearing his gun even for barn chores, and he intensified her shooting lessons. One evening, as she practiced dry firing in the cabin, he adjusted her grip, his hands covering hers on the revolver. The touch was purely instructional, but she felt the warmth of his skin, the careful strength in his fingers. When she turned her head, he was closer than expected, his breath stirring her shortened hair. "Like this," he murmured, but his eyes weren't on the gun anymore. The moment hung crystalline between them. Then Sage's distressed whinny broke through the window, and they jumped apart. The mare was in labor. They worked through the night together, Lena holding Sage's head while Calder assisted with the delivery. The mare struggled, the foal positioned wrong. Calder's face was grim as he worked, sweat beading his forehead despite the cool night. "Come on, girl," Lena whispered to Sage, stroking her neck. "You can do this. You're the strongest one here." Whether it was coincidence or the mare took courage from her voice, Sage gave a mighty push just as Calder managed to reposition the foal. In a rush of fluid and motion, a tiny bay colt slipped into the world. "There we go," Calder breathed, clearing the foal's airways. "There's your baby, Sage." They watched as mother and baby found each other, the colt struggling to his feet on legs like stilts. Lena found herself crying, exhaustion, relief, the simple miracle of new life after so much death and fear. "Hey," Calder said softly, touching her shoulder. "You did good, kept her calm when it mattered." She leaned into his touch without thinking, and his arm came around her. They stood like that in the barn, watching the foal take his first wobbling steps, and Lena felt something she'd thought was dead forever, hope for a future that might be more than just survival. But even as dawn broke over the ranch, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, she knew the wanted poster was just the beginning. Someone, somewhere, would recognize that sketch. The past had a way of catching up, especially in a territory where a $500 bounty could change a man's life. "What are you thinking?" Calder asked, his arms still warm around her shoulders. "That happiness might be the most dangerous thing of all," she admitted. "It makes you forget to keep running." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Maybe it's time to stop running. Maybe it's time to make a stand." She looked up at him, This scarred, steady man who'd taken her in without questions, who'd chosen to believe her when the whole world called her murderess. In his eyes, she saw not just protection but partnership, not just shelter but home. Maybe, she agreed, and let herself lean into his strength just a little longer. While the new colt learned to navigate the world on unsteady legs and the sun climbed higher over the Wyoming plains. They came for her on a Tuesday morning when the sky was the color of old pewter. Calder had ridden out to check the eastern fence line, and Lena was alone, kneading bread dough in the kitchen. The first she knew of trouble was the sound of multiple horses approaching, too many for friendly visitors. Sheriff Ben Crawford stood at the head of 6 men, his star glinting dully in the overcast light. Lena recognized some faces from town, including Samuel Hayes from the bank. 2 others wore the rough clothes and hard expressions of bounty hunters. "Miss Garrison," Crawford called from the yard, his hand resting on his pistol. "Or should I say, Mrs. Morrell. We know you're in there. Come out peaceful-like, and nobody needs to get hurt." Lena's hands stilled in the dough. Her mind raced. Calder's rifle was by the door, the revolver he'd been teaching her with in the bedroom drawer, but 6 men with guns drawn. She'd never make it. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch, chin raised. "Sheriff Crawford, what brings you all the way out here?" "You know damn well why we're here." One of the bounty hunters spat tobacco juice into the dirt. $500 worth of why. Crawford held up the wanted poster. "Lena Garrison, you're under arrest for the murder of Jonathan Morrell in the Idaho Territory. Come along quiet now." "The name is Lena Morrell," she said steadily, "and I defended myself against a man who was trying to kill me. That's for a judge to decide," Crawford said, though something in his eyes suggested he wasn't entirely unsympathetic. "Where's Harlan?" "Out working. This has nothing to do with him," Hayes sneered. "Harboring a fugitive? He'll hang alongside you if he interferes." The sound of approaching hoofbeats made them all turn. Calder appeared over the rise, riding hard. He must have seen them from a distance. He reined up between Lena and the men, his face carved from stone. "Crawford," he said evenly, "this is private property." "Not anymore, it isn't." One of the bounty hunters said, "We're here legal, collecting a lawful bounty." "Legal doesn't mean right," Calder replied, dismounting slowly. "The lady says she defended herself. I believe her. What you believe doesn't matter." Crawford said, "I've got a warrant. Stand aside. Harlan, or I'll arrest you too." Calder moved to stand beside Lena on the porch. "Then I guess you'll have to arrest me." The tension stretched taut. Hands hovered near weapons. Then Crawford sighed, looking older than his years. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. The woman has to answer for what she's done. If she's innocent, the court will—" "The court in Idaho is run by her dead husband's brother," Calder interrupted. "She won't get justice there, just a rope." "That's not our concern," Hayes said impatiently. "The law is the law. Your concern is the $500. Lena said bitterly. "At least be honest about it." One of the bounty hunters dismounted, pulling iron shackles from his saddlebag. "Enough talk. You're coming with us, woman, one way or another." He advanced on the porch. Calder's hand moved to his gun, but Lena caught his wrist. "Don't," she whispered. "Not for me. You'll die for nothing." "Not nothing," he said fiercely, but she stepped forward, away from him. "I'll come," she said to Crawford. "No need for violence. Just let me get my shawl." Crawford nodded. She went inside, Calder following. The moment they were out of sight, he gripped her shoulders. "You can't go with them. They'll railroad you straight to the gallows. And if I don't, they'll kill you trying to stop them." Her eyes burned with unshed tears. "I won't have your blood on my hands. Lena, promise me," she said urgently. "Promise you won't throw your life away, not for someone like me." His jaw worked. "You're not—" "Promise me." He pulled her against him suddenly, fiercely, his lips finding hers in a kiss that tasted of desperation and all the words they'd never said. When he pulled back, his eyes were wild. "I promise I won't die," he said. "But I'm not giving up on you either." She touched his scarred cheek once, memorizing the feel. Then she took her shawl from the peg and walked back outside. The bounty hunter roughly pulled her hands behind her back, the iron cold and heavy on her wrists. They lifted her onto a spare horse, tying her hands to the saddle horn. "You take care of that mare and foal," she called to Calder as they started to ride away. "Sage trusts you." He stood on the porch, rigid as granite, keeping his promise not to draw, but his eyes never left hers until the riders crested the hill. The jail in Willow Creek was a small stone building with 2 cells. They put her in the back one, away from the window. The shackles came off, replaced by the cage. Crawford seemed uncomfortable with the whole business. "You'll be transferred to Idaho tomorrow," he told her. "Judge Garrison wants the trial in his jurisdiction." "His brother's jurisdiction," Lena corrected. "Where I'll be tried, convicted, and hanged within a week." Crawford shifted his weight. "You really kill him?" "I really defended myself," she said. "He was beating me to death with a poker. The knife was all I could reach." The sheriff studied her through the bars. "My wife's sister married a man like that. Took her 3 years to die of the beatings. Always wish someone had stopped him sooner." He left without saying more, but an hour later, a woman brought her a decent meal and a clean blanket. Small mercies. Night fell. Lena sat on the narrow bunk, trying not to think about tomorrow, about the journey to Idaho, about the rope waiting at the end. Mostly, she tried not to think about Calder, about the kiss that said everything they'd been too careful to admit. Near midnight, she heard a soft scraping at the barred window high on the wall. Then a familiar voice, barely a whisper. "Lena." She stood on the bunk, reaching up to the window. "Calder, what are you—" "Shut up and listen. There's a lawyer in Cheyenne, Thomas Morrison. He's made a name defending women in situations like yours. I'm riding there tonight." "Calder, no, it's too late for lawyers. And you promised—" "I promised I wouldn't die. I didn't promise I'd let you hang." His fingers appeared through the bars, and she pressed her hand against them. "I've got money saved. Enough to hire him, maybe enough to change some minds in Idaho." "Why?" The word broke from her. "Why do all this for me?" "You know why," he said roughly. "Same reason you stepped in front of me today. Same reason we've been dancing around each other for weeks." The truth of it hung between them in the darkness. "If I don't see you again," she began. "You will, I swear it. Just stay strong. Don't let them break you before I can get help." Footsteps echoed from the front of the jail. "Go," she whispered urgently. His fingers squeezed hers once more. Then he was gone. She heard the faint sound of hoofbeats fading into the night. In the morning, they loaded her into a prison wagon for the journey to Idaho. Crawford rode alongside with 2 deputies. The bounty hunters had already left with a bank draft for half the reward, the rest payable upon conviction. As they rolled out of Willow Creek, Lena caught sight of a familiar figure on the ridgeline. Reverend Pritchard sat his horse, watching the procession. When he saw her looking, he touched his hat, not in respect, but in satisfaction. The scarlet woman was getting her comeuppance at last. But as the wagon jolted over the rough road, Lena held on to 2 things, the memory of Calder's lips on hers, and his promise. He would come. She just had to survive long enough to see if a lawyer from Cheyenne could work miracles. The Idaho Territory border was still 2 days away. 2 days to hope, 2 days to plan, 2 days to believe that maybe, just maybe, love might prove stronger than law. She closed her eyes and thought of Sage and her foal, of mornings in the kitchen with coffee and comfortable silence, of a man who'd seen her at her lowest and chosen to stand beside her anyway. If those memories were all she had left, they were still more than she'd ever expected to find. The wagon rolled on, carrying her back toward her past. But Lena's heart remained behind, with a scarred rancher who'd promised the impossible. And in the Wyoming Territory, she'd learned that sometimes the impossible was just another word for a fighting chance. The attack came at dusk on the second day, just as they entered a narrow canyon. The first shot took Deputy Walsh off his horse. The second sent Crawford diving for cover behind the wagon. "Ambush!" Crawford shouted, drawing his revolver. "Take cover!" Gunfire erupted from the rocks above. Lena threw herself flat in the wagon bed, hands still shackled, splinters flying as bullets struck the wooden sides. She could hear men shouting, horses screaming, the sharp crack of rifles. The remaining deputy, a young man named Peters, tried to return fire but took a bullet in the shoulder. He fell beside the wagon, clutching his wound. Crawford was pinned down, firing sporadically at muzzle flashes in the gathering darkness. Then, sudden silence. "Sheriff Crawford," a rough voice called from the rocks. "We got no quarrel with you, just want the woman. Send her out, and you can ride away." "Can't do that." Crawford called back. "She's my prisoner, my responsibility. $500 buys a lot of responsibility. Sheriff, but it ain't worth dying for." Lena recognized danger when she heard it. These weren't lawmen or even regular bounty hunters. These were the kind of men who'd kill everyone and take her to Idaho themselves, or worse, decide she was too much trouble and put a bullet in her for the reward money anyway. She had to move. Crawling to Peters, she searched his pockets with her bound hands until she found the key to her shackles. Her fingers fumbled with the lock as gunfire resumed. "Woman's worth more alive," another voice shouted. "But dead still pays half." The shackles fell away. Lena grabbed Peters's gun and rolled out of the wagon on the opposite side. The young deputy was still breathing, but barely. Crawford was running low on ammunition. She could tell by his careful shots. The canyon walls were steep but not impossible. In the growing darkness, if she could reach the rocks. "Crawford," she called. "I'm going to try for the high ground. Cover me." "Lena, no!" But she was already moving, scrambling up the loose scree. Crawford cursed and increased his fire rate, trying to keep the ambushers' heads down. Lena climbed desperately, her dress catching and tearing on the rocks, her hands bloody from sharp stones. A figure loomed above her, one of the attackers, rifle aimed down. She fired Peter's revolver without thinking. The man toppled backward with a cry. She reached his position and grabbed his rifle, checking the load. From here, she could see 3 more shooters among the rocks. Crawford was almost out of ammunition. She could see him checking his cartridge belt, taking careful aim. She fired at the nearest attacker. The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder, but her target went down. The other 2 turned their attention to her, bullets whining off the rocks near her head. Then, impossibly, she heard hoofbeats, riders approaching fast from the direction they'd come. Hope and fear warred in her chest. More attackers or help. The thunder of horses filled the canyon. She saw him then. Calder, riding like the devil himself. And beside him, a distinguished-looking man in a city suit who handled his horse like he'd been born to it. Behind them rode 3 more men she didn't recognize. The ambushers saw them too. One tried to flee, but Calder's shot took him down before he'd gone 10 feet. The other surrendered, throwing down his rifle and raising his hands. In the sudden quiet, Lena half climbed, half fell back down to the canyon floor. Calder was off his horse before it fully stopped, catching her as her legs gave out. "You're hurt," he said, seeing the blood on her hands. "Just scratches." "Calder, how—" "Later." He turned to Crawford, who was staring at them with a mix of relief and confusion. "Sheriff, this is Thomas Morrison, attorney at law. He's got some documents you need to see." Morrison dismounted with surprising grace for a man his age. "Sheriff Crawford, I have here a writ of habeas corpus signed by Judge William Thornton of the Territorial Court." He handed over the papers. "My client is to be released to my custody pending a new hearing." Crawford read by the light of a match, his eyebrows rising. "This is highly irregular. So is transporting a woman to be tried in a court run by her victim's brother," Morrison said smoothly. "I have also brought affidavits from 3 women in Idaho who will testify to Jonathan Morell's violent nature, and a doctor who treated Mrs. Morell's injuries on multiple occasions." "You can't just—" Crawford began. "I can, and I have." Morrison interrupted. Unless you'd prefer to explain to Judge Thornton why you allowed a prisoner in your custody to be attacked by bandits? Men who seemed remarkably well-informed about your route and cargo? Crawford's face darkened. You're not suggesting. I'm suggesting nothing. Merely pointing out that my client has already been endangered once while in custody. The court takes a dim view of such negligence. Peters moaned from beside the wagon, breaking the tension. One of the men who'd ridden with Calder, apparently a doctor, was already tending to him. The boy needs immediate care. The doctor called. So does Walsh, though I fear it may be too late for him. Crawford looked between the wounded men, the dead attackers, and the papers in his hand. Finally, he sighed. I suppose I have no choice. Mrs. Morrell, you're released to Mr. Morrison's custody, but if you fail to appear for this hearing, she'll appear, Calder said firmly, as Morrison handled the legal formalities. Calder led Lena aside. In the darkness, she could barely see his face, but his hands were gentle as he examined her injuries. These need cleaning, he said. There's a town about 5 miles back. We'll stop there for the night. Calder, the money for the lawyer, the ride to Cheyenne and back in 2 days. Would have ridden to hell and back, he said roughly. Don't you know that by now? She touched his face, felt the stubble of 2 days' hard riding. I'm beginning to. The town was little more than a way station, but it had a small inn. Morrison secured rooms while the doctor continued tending to Peters. Walsh hadn't survived, and Crawford would have to explain the death of a deputy to his superiors. In her room, Lena finally washed the blood and dirt from her hands and face. A knock came at the door. Calder with a tray of food and medical supplies. Morrison says the hearing is in 3 weeks, he said, setting the tray down. In Cheyenne, not Idaho. Judge Thornton is known to be fair, and Morrison thinks with the evidence he's gathered, he thinks I have a chance. Lena finished. A good one. Calder took her hands, began cleaning the cuts carefully. Turns out Jonathan Morrell was well known in certain circles, the kind of man who left a trail of hurt women behind him. Morrison found plenty willing to speak up, now that someone's asking. Lena watched his face as he worked, this man who'd upended his life for her. I need to tell you something, she said. In case the hearing doesn't go our way, I need you to know. He looked up, and she lost her words in his dark eyes. I know, he said simply. Me too. Later, after he'd bandaged her hands and made sure she ate. After Morrison had outlined the legal strategy. After Crawford and the survivors had headed back to Willow Creek with their dead. Lena stood at her window looking out at the stars. A soft knock, and Calder entered. You can't sleep. Too much to think about. She turned to him. Those men, the ambush, that wasn't random, was it? His jaw tightened. Morrison did some checking. Judge Garrison put up another $1,000. Private-like. Wanted to make sure you never made it to trial. So, even if I'd gone peacefully, you'd have been dead before you reached Idaho. He moved to stand beside her. Lena, whatever happens at the hearing, you can't go back there. Ever. I know. She leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. But I'm tired of running. Calder, if the hearing goes badly, it won't. But if it does, then we'll face it together. His arm came around her. I told you before. Maybe it's time to make a stand. Morrison's good. The evidence is strong. And Judge Thornton has no love for men who abuse the law to protect abusers. They stood together in the darkness. 2 damaged souls who'd found each other in the vast wilderness of Wyoming. Tomorrow would bring the journey back to Cheyenne, to lawyers and courts and the machinery of justice. But tonight, they had this, the quiet understanding that whatever came next, they would face it side by side. Tell me about the foal, Lena said softly. Has he gotten steadier on his feet? Calder's chuckle rumbled through his chest. Steady enough to kick me when I tried to check his hooves. Takes after his mother. They talked quietly of small things. The ranch, the horses, the everyday miracles that would be waiting if she could just survive the next few weeks. And, in that modest room in a forgotten town, Lena dared to hope that the impossible might indeed be just another word for a fighting chance. The Cheyenne courthouse stood like a monument to civilization on the frontier, red brick and white columns, imposing enough to make even innocent folks feel guilty. Lena stood before it in a borrowed dress of respectable gray wool, her hair pinned severely back. Morrison had been specific about her appearance, demure, proper, the very image of a woman who killed only when left no other choice. "Remember," Morrison said as they climbed the steps, "let me do most of the talking. Answer questions simply and directly. The truth is our best weapon here." Calder walked beside her, his presence both comfort and concern. He'd refused to stay behind despite Morrison's suggestion that his notorious reputation might not help. "I stand with her," he'd said, and that ended the discussion. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread about the mail-order bride who'd killed her husband, and curiosity seekers filled every bench. Lena recognized some faces from Willow Creek, including Reverend Pritchard, no doubt hoping to see divine justice served. Judge William Thornton was a silver-haired man with keen eyes and a reputation for seeing through lies. He reviewed the papers before him while the prosecutor, a young, ambitious fellow named Charles Hartley, whispered urgently with a well-dressed man Lena recognized with a chill. Marcus Garrison, her dead husband's brother. "This hearing," Judge Thornton began, "is to determine whether sufficient evidence exists to extradite Mrs. Lena Morrell to Idaho Territory to stand trial for the murder of Jonathan Morrell. Mr. Morrison, you may present your case." Morrison stood, every inch the seasoned lawyer. "Your Honor, we intend to show that Mrs. Morrell acted in clear self-defense against a brutal, habitual abuser. Furthermore, we will demonstrate that she cannot receive a fair trial in Idaho, where the deceased's brother holds undue influence over the courts." "Objection!" Hartley jumped up. "The reputation of Idaho's judicial system is not overruled," Thornton said mildly. "Proceed, Mr. Morrison." The first witness was Dr. Francis Bauer from Boise, a thin, nervous man who'd clearly been reluctant to come. Under Morrison's questioning, he revealed years of treating Lena's injuries. Broken ribs, multiple times, fractured wrist, bruises in various stages of healing. Mrs. Morrell, Mrs. Garrison then, always claimed accidents. But he adjusted his spectacles. "I've seen enough to know the difference between accidents and abuse." "Why didn't you report this?" Morrison asked. "To whom?" "Mr. Garrison's brother was mayor. The sheriff was his cousin. I did what I could, documented everything, hoping someday—" He looked at Lena with apology in his eyes. "I'm sorry I couldn't do more." The next witnesses were women, 3 who'd worked in the Garrison household at various times, each with stories of Jonathan's rages, his violence, his particular cruelty when drunk. "He threw a pot of boiling water at her once," said Mary Palmer, a former cook. "Missed, thank the Lord, but only because she'd learned to dodge. Said she was clumsy when folks asked about the bruises, but we knew." Sarah Mitchell, who'd been a maid, testified with tears in her eyes. "The night she ran, I heard him screaming he'd kill her, heard furniture breaking, then silence. When I found him, the poker was still in his hand, blood on it from where he'd struck her." Hartley cross-examined aggressively, trying to shake their stories, but the women held firm. Then came his turn to present the prosecution's case. "Whatever the deceased's faults," Hartley declared, "the law does not permit wives to execute their husbands. Mrs. Morrell had options. She could have left, sought help, appealed to authorities." "What authorities?" Morrison interrupted. "The sheriff, who was Garrison's cousin, the mayor, who was his brother. She could have fled." Hartley insisted. Morrison called Lena to testify then. She took the stand, aware of every eye upon her, especially Calder's steady gaze giving her strength. "Mrs. Morrell," Morrison began gently, "tell us about the night your husband died." She spoke clearly, without embellishment. The years of escalating violence, the isolation, the threats against her family back east if she tried to leave. Then that final night. He came home drunk from the election celebration. His brother had won another term as mayor. He was jubilant. Said now no one could touch him. He could do whatever he wanted. She paused, steadying her voice. He started hitting me with his fists, then grabbed the poker. Said he'd beat me until I couldn't run anymore. I begged him to stop. He laughed and swung harder. What happened then? I fell against the kitchen table. My hand found the knife we'd used for supper. When he raised the poker again, I just wanted him to stop. I didn't think. I just struck out. Once? Morrison asked. Yes, once. He dropped the poker and fell. There was so much blood. I tried to stop it, but Mrs. Morell. Hartley rose for cross-examination, his voice sharp. You expect us to believe that a woman of your size overpowered a man like Jonathan Garrison? I didn't overpower him. I survived him. By killing him. By defending myself when he was about to kill me. So you say. But there are no witnesses to support. Your Honor. Morrison interrupted. I'd like to call one more witness. The court's indulgence. This witness has just arrived. Thornton nodded. The courtroom doors opened, and a woman entered, elegantly dressed, face pale but determined. Marcus Garrison half rose from his seat, face darkening. State your name for the record, Morrison said. Charlotte Garrison. I'm Marcus Garrison's wife and Jonathan's sister-in-law. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Thornton gavelled for order. Mrs. Garrison. Morrison continued. Do you have testimony relevant to this case? She looked directly at her husband, then at Lena. I do. I've been silent too long, but I cannot let another woman suffer for defending herself against a Garrison man. Marcus started to stand, but Thornton's sharp look stopped him. Charlotte continued, her voice gaining strength. Jonathan Garrison was a monster, just like his father before him. I've watched my husband follow the same pattern, the drinking, the rages, the violence. I've hidden my own bruises for 15 years. She rolled up her sleeve, showing old scars. Jonathan was worse. He liked hurting women, bragged about it to his brother. Lies, Marcus shouted. Your Honor, my wife is clearly— Sit down, Mr. Garrison, Thornton commanded. Continue, Mrs. Garrison. The night Jonathan died, my husband came home laughing. Said his brother was finally going to finish that uppity wife of his. Those were his words. When we heard Jonathan was dead, Marcus was furious, not grieved, furious. Said she'd cheated him of the pleasure of watching. She turned to Lena. I'm sorry I didn't speak sooner. I was afraid. I still am. But seeing you here, facing this with such courage, I couldn't stay silent. The testimony concluded. Thornton retired to consider. The wait felt eternal. Lena sat between Calder and Morrison. Charlotte Garrison on a bench behind them. Isolated but resolute. When Thornton returned, his expression was grave. The court has reviewed the evidence and testimony presented. While the taking of a life is always a serious matter, the law recognizes the right of self-defense, particularly when no other recourse exists. He looked directly at Lena. Mrs. Morell, the evidence clearly shows a pattern of severe abuse and a credible threat to your life on the night in question. Furthermore, the testimony reveals that the judicial system in Idaho Territory was compromised by the deceased's family connections. Marcus Garrison stood. Your Honor, this is— Sit down, sir, or I'll have you removed. Thornton's voice brooked no argument. I find insufficient grounds for extradition. Moreover, given the evidence presented, I recommend that Idaho Territory decline to pursue this matter further. Mrs. Morell, you are free to go. The gavel came down with finality. Lena sagged against Calder. Who pulled her against him? Propriety be damned. Morrison was shaking hands with other lawyers. Charlotte Garrison was walking out with her head high despite her husband's furious glare. And somewhere in the chaos, Reverend Pritchard slipped out, his hopes for divine vengeance disappointed. Outside the courthouse, in the crisp Wyoming air, Lena breathed freely for the first time in years. It's over, she whispered. It's really over. No, Calder said, turning her to face him. Now it begins. The life you should have had all along. He dropped to one knee right there on the courthouse steps, pulling a simple gold ring from his pocket. Lena Morell, will you marry me? Proper this time? With a willing bride and a man who'll cherish you? Through tears, she saw Morrison grinning, passers-by stopping to stare, even hard-bitten frontier folk smiling at the scene. Yes, she said, pulling him to his feet. Yes, I'll marry you. Calder Harlan. He kissed her then, there in front of God and Cheyenne and whoever cared to look. When they broke apart, Morrison cleared his throat. Might I suggest we celebrate with a meal? I believe Mrs. Garrison could use our support as well. He nodded toward Charlotte, who stood uncertainly nearby, her act of courage leaving her adrift. You'll come to the ranch, Lena told her impulsively. Until you decide what to do, we know something about starting over. As they walked toward Morrison's carriage, Calder asked quietly, Sure you want to take in another runaway? Lena thought of her own desperate flight, of kindness offered when she'd expected none. Someone once told me that in this country, a woman needs all the spine she can grow. Sometimes she needs help finding it. Wise man, Calder said, helping her into the carriage. The wisest. She agreed, settling beside him for the journey home. The wedding took place on a crystalline morning in early June, when the Wyoming wildflowers painted the meadows in purple and gold. The ceremony was simple, held in the same meadow where Calder had taught Lena to shoot all those months ago. It seemed fitting, the place where she'd learned to defend herself becoming the place where she chose to bind her life to another. Thomas Morrison stood as witness, along with Charlotte Garrison, now Charlotte Palmer, having reclaimed her maiden name after leaving her husband, the local preacher, a traveling minister named Reverend Davies, who actually believed in forgiveness and redemption, performed the ceremony with genuine warmth. Lena wore a simple dress of cream muslin she'd sewn herself. No white this time, no pretense of untouched innocence. She was a woman who'd survived, who'd killed to live, who'd found love in the ashes of despair. The dress reflected that truth, beautiful in its simplicity and strength. Calder waited for her by a makeshift altar of wildflowers, wearing his best shirt and a new string tie. When he saw her walking toward him through the swaying grass, his scarred face transformed with a smile that made her heart stumble. Dearly beloved, Reverend Davies began, we gather here under God's vast sky to witness something precious, two souls choosing each other, not from desperation or arrangement, but from love tested by fire. The vows were traditional, but the weight behind them was not. When Lena promised to honor and cherish, she thought of Calder standing between her and the townsmen's judgment. When Calder vowed to protect and provide, she remembered him lifting her from the mud. No questions asked, only shelter offered. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Davies declared. Mr. Harlan, you may kiss your bride. The kiss was gentle, a promise more than passion, witnessed by the mountains and the endless sky. The wedding feast was held at the ranch, tables set up in the yard. Word had somehow spread, and neighbors came, not many, for the Harlan ranch was isolated, but enough. Even some from Willow Creek arrived, bringing food and tentative apologies. The women who'd scorned Lena at the station now pressed dried fruit and preserves into her hands, murmuring congratulations. Sheriff Crawford made an appearance, still stiff but respectful. Heard what happened at the trial, he said quietly to Lena. Glad justice was served. Ma'am, real justice. I mean. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, the guests gradually departed. Charlotte helped clean up, still learning to move without flinching, still expecting reprimand that never came. She'd taken to the ranch with surprising ease, helping with the horses, finding peace in the simple routines. I'll be moving on soon, she told Lena as they washed dishes. My sister in California has offered me a home, but I wanted to thank you for showing me it was possible to leave, to speak truth, to live without fear. You showed yourself, Lena replied. I just provided a moment of inspiration. That night, alone at last in the cabin that was now truly home, Lena and Calder sat before the fire. She'd moved her few belongings into the bedroom that morning. Margaret's ghost finally laid to peaceful rest. "No regrets?" Calder asked, his arm around her as they watched the flames dance. "None," she said firmly. "You? Only that it took so long to find you." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from souls who've learned to communicate without words. Outside, an owl called, and the horses shifted in their stalls. "I've been thinking," Lena said eventually, "about that room we've been using for storage. It would make a good library, a place where women could come to read, to learn their letters if they need to. Like a school. More like a refuge, somewhere they could find strength in knowledge, the way my mother believed." She turned to look at him. "Would you mind? Mind my wife making our home a beacon for those who need it?" He kissed her forehead. "I'd be proud." Over the following months, Lena's vision took shape. The room filled with books, some donated, some purchased with the money from Sage's foal. Now a strong yearling, fetching a good price. Women began to come, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. Wives from neighboring ranches, daughters eager for more than domestic skills. Even some from town who'd heard about the woman who'd faced down a murder charge and won. Lena taught them to read, to write, to think for themselves. More importantly, she taught them their own worth. Some came nursing hidden bruises, finding in Lena's story the courage to change their own. Not all could leave. The frontier was harsh, options limited. But they found strength in knowledge and community. Calder supported it all without complaint, even when his quiet refuge became considerably less quiet. He built more shelves, fixed chairs, sometimes sat in the corner whittling while Lena taught, his presence a silent reminder that not all men feared educated women. One autumn evening, as the first snow began to fall, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains crimson. Sage grazed in the near pasture with her colt, now weaned and independent. The library room glowed with lamplight where two young women practiced their letters. "Remember that night you asked what I thought you were?" Calder said suddenly. "You said you didn't know yet," Lena recalled. "Then, later, you said I was someone who refused to break." "I was wrong," he said. "You're not someone who refuses to break. You're someone who broke and then rebuilt herself stronger. That's something else entirely." She leaned into him, thinking of all the breaking and rebuilding that had brought them here. "We both did. We did." He was quiet for a moment. "Lena, there's something I should tell you, about why I understood, about the scars. You don't have to." "I want to." He took a breath. "I killed a man too. 3 men, actually. They murdered my first family, my parents, my younger brother. The law said there wasn't enough evidence. Let them walk free. So I found my own justice. Had to leave Missouri after that. Came here where the past doesn't follow so close." Lena absorbed this final piece of the puzzle that was Calder Harlan. "And Margaret? Knew all of it. Loved me anyway. Like you do." He turned to face her. "We're quite a pair, aren't we? A mail-order bride who wasn't wanted and a rancher who stopped wanting anything. Until we found each other." She finished. The first winter storm arrived that night, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. But inside the cabin, there was warmth and light, and the quiet breathing of 2 people who'd found home in each other. In the morning, Lena would wake to find Calder had already stoked the fire and made coffee. She'd make biscuits while he fed the horses. The women would come for their lessons, bringing gossip and laughter. Life would continue in its rhythms, sometimes harsh, often beautiful, always real. But tonight, as snow fell soft as forgiveness over the Wyoming plains, Lena Harlan curled against her husband and whispered the words that had become her favorite prayer. "Thank you for the rain." He understood, as he always did, without that storm that had brought her to him, bedraggled and desperate. They'd never have found this life, never discovered that sometimes the worst moments lead to the best endings. "Thank you for surviving it," he whispered back. Outside, the wind sang its ancient song across the rangeland. carrying the promise of spring beneath its winter breath. And in a cabin where two broken souls had built something whole, the fire burned steady through the night, a beacon of hope in the vast darkness. Proof that love could grow in the unlikeliest ground. The mail-order bride who'd arrived unwanted had become a teacher, a wife, a woman of strength. The solitary rancher had opened his heart and home again. Together, they'd written a story the frontier would remember, not of conquest or gold or glory, but of two people who chose each other against all odds and made that choice count. It was, Lena thought as sleep finally claimed her, the only kind of story worth living. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Old West. I hope Lena and Calder's story touched your heart as much as it did mine. Where are you listening from today? Drop a comment below and let's connect across the miles. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of love, loss, and redemption on the frontier. Share your thoughts. What moved you most about this story? Until we meet again around the campfire. Partners.